Hi, my name's Valeria. I was originally born in Russia, but I moved to the United States when I was around 3, 4 years old, and that's when I started to learn English. So I'm a native, like both Russian and English speaker. All of my other languages that I've studied, they were all done through school. So at first I started learning Italian as like outside of school, after school for like 7 years, but I don't remember any of it. Sadly, I can read it, but I can't speak anything. So um, then in middle school, I started learning French, and that I studied all the way into college. Then in high school, I also started learning Latin, which I really, really loved. And I recently started trying to like get back into it a little bit. And then in college, I started learning Chinese in my junior year. So I did it for 2 years in junior and senior year. And I still have kind of been trying to keep it going after graduation. And then most recently, I've started trying to self study Japanese as of this August. In total, all of the languages I either know or have experience learning is English, Russian, Italian, French, Latin, Chinese, and Japanese.
In terms of being raised bilingual, what language would you say defines you the most if you like had to pick one?
I think even my like English self is still very colored with a lot of aspects of like my cultural Russian self. So it's very hard for me to separate my being into like one or the other, you know? Ultimately, if I had to pick English, all of my education, all of the majority of the people I've ever met and like grown in different personal ways with, all of that has been English. And in Russian, that's more of like my childhood emotional thing. That like, you know, like if you ever go to a therapist, they'll be like, oh, this thing, we will unpack it from things that happened in your childhood. Well, that is like the basis of all of my everything. My roots are Russian, but then like the flower that has grown out of it is mostly in English.
From what I remember from your videos, I had watched a little bit about how you like associate the language with the memories that you have the language in, and I think you were talking a little bit about how if you tell what happened to you at that point in time in a different language that wasn't used in that memory, then it's like you don't have all the details because you describe it differently in different languages. That's so fascinating. I think you had mentioned in one of your videos about learning French in the classroom. How was that for you personally?
It was a very positive experience for me because that was one of the classes that I really enjoyed, like almost everything about, which is not the case for most other people. Even like my other classmates, they didn't really enjoy it or they didn't get into it as much as I did. And I could even just tell that by how apathetic they were in terms of trying to pronounce things right or even try to pronounce them right. And I don't think that was always in terms of being necessarily embarrassed of pronouncing it incorrectly or sounding wrong. I think it was also a lot of it just they didn't care very
Mm-hmm.
much
Right.
about the language. It's just like, oh, I have to take a foreign language. I picked this one. I'm in this class. I have to do it. As opposed to, oh, I actually really enjoy the process of learning this language and I know that it's valuable and interesting
Mm-hmm.
in its own way. I had, I guess, three very good language teachers that I really liked. And I think they really liked me as well because like sometimes I would stay after class and we would just like chat about something. They would ask me like, "Oh, have you listened to this French music?" I'd be like, "Oh, no, I haven't." And then we'd like swap recommendations
Yeah.
or like things like that. One thing that really separated me from other students in my high school who took language classes was that I think it was like my passion and desire to like do more as opposed to just do what was given. Like, I remember in eighth grade, I asked my teacher, I was like, I'm really bored. Can you like give me more things to learn? And so he gave me the textbook of like the next year. And I would do that with the homework of the current class. I would go through that other textbook and do like more homework, which was, you know, And then I ended up being able to skip a whole grade the next year and go into like the next level because I passed their final exam.
I sometimes wish that I had found the passion earlier, like in high school too. But again, like you said that you had amazing teachers. I had a really bad teacher, so it's so interesting kind of to see how those influence you, especially if you're not studying, like self-studying the language initially. Would you say that pretty much like every experience that you've had learning languages in the classroom, just from high school and up until like when you were in college, would you say that they were generally very positive?
I can't say that I've ever had a bad experience
Mm-hmm.
learning any languages because I was, I guess, very lucky to have really good teachers for all of them. Also in high school, I took physics in 11th grade with one teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Loved it, freaking loved it. It was like one of my favorite other classes. And I took it again at a higher level in senior year, and I had a different teacher, and I hated it,
Yeah.
even though I had absolutely loved it the previous year. Like, I think the teacher really has a massive impact on like how much a student will enjoy or not enjoy a particular like subject.
So you said that you were self-studying Japanese. Like how has that been for you just in general? That's a really big question, but especially in comparison to your really positive classroom experience.
I didn't even expect how different it was going to be because I had kind of only ever learned a language either through like, life, which was English, right? Or through the classroom by being taught by somebody,
Yeah.
like officially. And I didn't realize, I guess, that that does not at all translate to knowing how to self-study something by yourself. So for Japanese, I had, gone through some like very beginner guides of like, oh, do this first, then this, then this, then this. And then
Mm-hmm.
once I was done with that, I no longer had like instructions to follow. So I had to try to figure out like, okay, well, what do I do now? So then I got a textbook and then I started going through the textbook. Just going through the textbook without, like a human supplement,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't really work for me. This exercise down here, it's pair work. It's like point
Oh.
at each item and ask your partner to do something. Ask the students in your classroom about their background. And I'm just like, okay, skip, skip, skip. Oh, then it's the next chapter already. And I'm like, I haven't learned anything. There wasn't a teacher to immediately ask a question. There wasn't somebody who was just going to explain the grammars to me. Like, I was very used to this, the schedule that they provide for me. They just tell me what to do and I do it, right? And they're there as a resource for whenever I need help or even as like a motivator thing that, oh, I'm not just doing this for myself, I'm also doing this for them so that they don't feel like they've failed as a teacher. I don't want to embarrass myself in front of my classmates. I need to like prepare for this project well and be able to like talk about this thing. I need to prepare for the class and know all the vocabulary. That kind of big difference of like doing something for yourself and doing something for other people. So I think I kind of relied a lot more on like pushing myself to do things for other people or like just to not look bad in front of other people as opposed to just doing it for myself now. That's like another one of the things that I grappled with where I also wasn't sure like what did I even want my goals to be with Japanese here when I was self-studying. Do I How fast do I want to go through the learning? I wasn't sure how to set like what I should learn when. In school, I didn't really have to do anything except for what I was told. And here, I had to come up with what to tell myself to do without the knowledge of like how do I do it for this language. That's why it's like been very hard with Japanese because I had no basis. Languages that I'm already like intermediate or more advanced in, I'm okay because those I already know how to do it from school and I don't need to like the process of like upkeeping those is much more just read stuff in that language, watch movies in that language, talk to people in that language because you can, right? It's not really about like learning specific things anymore.
Right. Yeah.
as opposed to here, I know nothing. That was my biggest mistake, I guess, that I think I had to learn through this experience, which was just because you have successfully learned a language through like classroom or teacher study
Mm-hmm.
does not mean that you know how to do it by yourself at all. And you're going to have to go through like a lot of trial and error and experience to figure that out for yourself.
I think you're the only person that has had, a lot of positive experience with the classroom. Like literally the only person. I've talked this about everyone like in my real life too, but also I've just seen online like it's always just like, oh, like if you're having trouble in the classroom, and like you're literally like the prime example of like actually no, that's not right at all.
I have not used any online tutors ever. LOL. I've only used one time for Chinese, so that has not been part of my experience yet. Actually, the thing that I have been using as kind of like a substitute for a real teacher for Japanese has been this YouTuber who goes by Tokini Andy. And oh my God, he has been like, he was the reason why I figured out what I have been missing this whole time, which was like a human to lecture me about the language, you know? And what he does, he has this whole series of videos literally following all of the chapters of this book, this textbook.
Oh,
He
wow.
goes through every chapter, he explains every grammar point in the way that he believes makes more sense than it does there. And he gives like example sentences and he like, pronounces it for you. And you just literally, it's exactly what I wanted. I assume that right now all students are just doing their classes over Zoom. So
Yeah.
this is basically like a pre-recorded Zoom lecture for that chapter,
Yeah.
which is like, I love it.
Would there be a language that you would never want to learn?
I don't have like a language in mind, but I think a language I would not want to learn is one where I'm not interested in the culture. I'm not really learning languages for the purpose of like doing historical linguistic analysis or like translating stuff, right? I'm more of learning it to interact with the culture in some way. Native American languages, not super interested in like learning them to speak, like maybe would be interested in, you know, their background, but not learning the language.
So you had talked about how, especially being bilingual, each language that you had learned has its specific place in your memories and how it's influenced you. How did being raised bilingual, as you can remember, like affect you just as a child?
When I was growing up, I really liked Russian cartoons. And I didn't like as many American cartoons as much. And so, like, I don't know, sometimes when other kids were talking about their cartoons, I would be like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Or like there would be like almost like not a complete fullness of background connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Another place where I exhibited that was I remember in fifth grade, we had a yearbook and we had to write down our favorite song. And I didn't know any English songs at the time. So I wrote down a Russian song. And then they had to call my mom and be like, we can't print that. And she had to be like, Valeria, what's a song that you want to write that's in English? And I was like, I don't know. And then she was like, just think of something. And I was like, okay, Damaged by, I think it was Vanity Kane. I don't know what their name is, but that was the song I put because one of my friends had listened to that song on her iPod once and I remembered that and I didn't know any other songs. I can interestingly enough identify with other cultures. So like there's this Facebook group called Subtle Asian Traits. I'm not Asian, but literally almost everything there is the same culturally. Like all the jokes, I understand and laugh at because my family was the same, being Russian. Like, yes, we also will not wear shoes in the house. Yes, we also have a drawer full of plastic bags under our sink. Yes, we also will like get really angry if we do not do like the best grades and have like a really good extracurricular. We have to be better than other students. I don't care if other students all failed. You should not have failed. I completely relate. So that's been kind of interesting. But also having like that other secret language almost that is just for my family because I don't actually know a lot of Russian people otherwise here. So Russian is usually I only speak it when I'm talking to my family. So it's like very much a tight family language, and it's almost weird to speak it to like other people.
Yeah.
Like I've recently actually made friends with this one woman who's from Russia, but she's here. Um, and like talking to her has been fine. But there are some moments where I'm like, this is kind of strange. What actually made you want to learn Russian?
Well, first of all, there were a ton of resources, especially Russian being considered generally by English speakers a harder language to learn than just like Spanish, for example. These past 2 or 3 years, I have been really a stickler for learning and trying to be, doing my best in Arabic as well as Turkish. And those are also very hard for native English speakers. And they also don't come with a lot of resources. And I think that just with my identity too, and having that identity of like, oh, you're like a linguist, like you're like a language learner, like you're like the only person that I know that does, that kind of stuff. Having that constantly being pushed at me, I think, is what made me sort of feel like I was a little bit of a failure in terms of, oh, like me being really hard on myself and saying, well, I have like no resources here to learn Turkish or one of the Arabic dialects. So it wasn't classical Arabic where there are more resources for that. But I was learning a dialect which you speak. It was a language that I had wanted to start actually next year
Mhm.
because I had only been to Russia for 5 hours. I don't even count that because it was 5 hours. If I'm interested in the culture, if I don't know anything about the culture, especially, it's kind of like my key to unlock my interest more and get really into the history and get really into the people that live there. And I had never learned anything about Russian culture or Russia in general, basically. In high school either. I didn't take any classes when I was in college. And that was kind of the same mentality that I had for learning Turkish or Arabic, right? So, really anything that I wasn't educated on in high school, I started to use languages as a way to unlock that realm of the world that I had very little knowledge about. Having the quarantine be here, it was like, I need something to drive me again, and I feel like if a language has a lot of resources, because I know how I study, and I couldn't use that same method to study the others with so little resources, like I felt like for me it was better for, I guess, my health maybe to do something that I knew that I could do with the right resources that would provide me the right way, or I guess the right way for me to study and know that I could reach a certain goal or a certain level that I wanted to.
My mom, she always like discouraged everyone from learning it.
Really?
I don't know
Why?
why. She was always like, "Oh, as an American, like you're never going to learn it to the point where like you would speak it confidently or fluently, I guess is the better word."
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like not everyone necessarily cares about that. She also didn't really think that most people would be interested at all in Russia or like going there because it's kind of in a weird political place right now, especially, and for the past like couple years.
And with the case systems, I was just like, well, it will be hard, but it won't be as hard because I've experienced that part of grammar with German, and with
Mm.
Russian it's the same thing. Like you can't speak it without knowing cases.
I think actually the thing about cases, I think that's what made me really like Latin as well, because that was like I finally learned them formally and what they mean. Because my Russian, I can't tell you any of the grammar rules. Like I just don't know what they are. I know what sounds about right. I can
Right.
tell you if something is being mispronounced or if like how to correct like your sentence, but I can't tell you why for the most part. So, especially with cases, oh my God, and especially with numbers, I don't know if
Mhm.
you got to that point, but
Oh yeah, and it's like what? Yeah.
I still freaking say numbers like incorrectly sometimes. Not like just the, counting numbers, but like the modified ones.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I think that's what drew me so much to Latin as well. Once I started learning about the cases, I was like, oh, this is the same as Russian. Oh my God. You
Mm.
can rearrange all the words in any way that you want, and the sentence maintains the meaning. Because especially with like the artistic ways that you can use that linguistic uniqueness is that like I think Russian poetry is really great, but also when I was really getting better at Latin, we analyzed Latin poetry, and oh
Mm-hmm.
my God, that stuff is amazing. um, it's like because you can rearrange everything, you can really directly you can have so much more control over how it all flows. Like there's these rhythms that a poem must follow if it's like this category of poem. And a lot of times I think there's almost always a rhyme scheme of some sort, but then there's also sometimes you can read it like around, like the first letter of each line down, and then around, and then up, and then back, and it like has another line of the poem, and then it like gives it even more significance. And I was just like, whoa.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just think that part of both of the languages is really, really cool.
With this year and everything that it has brought, I know you've talked a little bit about it with like your update a few months ago, but how has that influenced your language learning, like just this whole year?
For the first half of the year, it kind of made it so that I did absolutely nothing with my language learning. Um, it just kind of put it on pause, a pause that just kept, you know, being snoozed longer and longer.
Mm-hmm.
um, so, like, because I noticed that during the quarantine when it happened, a lot of people decided, oh, this is a great time to like learn a new language, or like do more language learning because I suddenly have all this free time. And then I was like, yeah, I can't do that because I don't have any free time. I am still working. I am like, because what was happening for me in the beginning was I was not only in a little bit of a like depressed, low confidence, low everything place because of the place that I was living, which exuded all of that, but
Mm-hmm.
also I did not like my job. And so I had everything that was just kind of like, eh.
Mm-hmm.
And like in the beginning of the year. And so I started to try to find a new job. And I had basically my job for like, you know, work hours. And then after that, I also had like preparing for interviews for a new job and sending applications and all of that. And so I didn't really have time for anything. So it felt kind of inconsistent. I don't know. There was like a cognitive dissonance where it's like, oh, people are using this time to do something that they really want to do, that they've been like, they suddenly have free time. And I'm like, I have none of that. I can't do any of that. That doesn't like work. So I
Yeah.
almost felt like I was missing out on something. And I felt like I could be doing that, but I also obviously can't with my situation.
Right.
So I felt like this kind of longing to do that, but also, you know, there's no way.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first half of my year until I got a job and I moved out of that, for me, treacherous place. And I moved into back to New York where I was much happier immediately. And once I moved to New York, I did have a month where I had no job at the time and I already had like secured a job to start the next month. So
Mm-hmm.
that's when I started doing all the things that people have been like talking about. Oh, I can do this in quarantine. So I made like YouTube videos again. I did some like language study a little bit. Um, and then that's about when I decided, yo, I'm going to start Japanese because why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
I finally can. Why not? Um, so that's kind of where I've been. I've been self-studying Japanese a little bit, like in the way that I can, of course, like with struggles and ups and downs and like me trying to figure it out. But also, self-studying that has made me once again like reignite my passion for other languages that have been kind of either in maintenance or kind of below that, even like not really touched. Like I wanted to do Latin again because I don't know. I just felt like it. So I dug up my like old textbook and I started like translating things again. And I was like, ah. Um, but yeah, and then Chinese as well. I started like trying to talk to myself
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
Chinese. So that was fun. And that's about where I've been. And I guess the other important thing that just happened to me was that I really tried to stop comparing what I'm doing to other people online since like joining the language community online. Even though it's not like I didn't join it, but like now I'm more, of a presence within it. So
Right.
I see what other people are doing and I almost feel compelled to either do the same thing or compete in some way. Um, but I've tried to really not do that because I had to like always remind myself that's not why I want to like, that's not like what my goals are. I don't
Yeah.
have concrete goals at the moment either because like I don't really know what I want my goals to be either.
Mhm.
Still have to figure that out. That's another thing. Like I don't even know how people create their goals yet.
Yeah.
Sometimes everyone's coming out with these like 2021 language goals
Yeah.
and I'm like I don't even know what my goals are. A big thing for me this year was to try to find my own path
Mhm.
and not take so much influence from like the online world
Yeah.
because that's pretty hard.
Your identity of other people about you being a language learner, has that impacted you positively or negatively?
So I think with people who like I meet completely outside of that circle of, like-minded language enthusiasts, they like when I like when I tell them about that kind of part of my identity that, oh yeah, I really like languages, da, 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 then they're like, oh, that's so cool, like amazing. And then that's that. There's no like more details that they are very interested to know. They're not like trying to validate that identity either.
Mm.
There's none of that. It's just like, oh, cool. That's really interesting. That's not like most other people I know, something
Mhm.
like that. So outside of the community as a whole, it's like pretty positive. There's pretty much never a negative. Um,
Mhm.
it's great. But then inside the community, it's just by seeing other people, how other people present themselves in the community, because they have a similar identity, like label to yours, you will inherently kind of compare it.
Mm.
Like, oh, am I part of this group? Because that's kind of what you do. Like, no matter what identity it is, like, even if, say you're like, I don't know, half Korean, yeah, like half white, half Korean. If you go to Korea, maybe some people will, like, you will see full Korean people and you'll be like, oh, am I like Korean enough to blend in, to be part of this group, uh, to pass, as full Korean or whatever.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of the same idea here, where you identify as like a language learner or a polyglot, whatever. People have different
Yeah.
definitions for that, but um, and so you will inherently always be like trying to compare other people to the standard of what that is, as well as yourself to the standard and to other people. And that's where it gets like kind of weird because sometimes you're not consciously doing that, but you will start to like maybe change your behavior or what you do or how you think about things based on those things that you do subconsciously.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's where it could potentially get a little like toxic, maybe, because you start to move away from what you thought you wanted to be or what you kind of rooted yourself in that you were or you are. And then you start to like not really recognize that in what you're doing anymore.
Mhm.
And that's where you have like a little crisis. And then you have to remind yourself, oh, yes, this is what I am. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't need to care about these things.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's always going to be a cycle where you kind of get like this and then you come back.
With your name, so you had a video talking just about that and how people like kind of grow into your name. Explain that just a little bit more in context, and then maybe like say how you've, I guess, grown into your name, and like how that's influenced your identity.
Your name is a representation of you, but also you are a representation of your name. So it's kind of this kind of cycle that ends up happening where you act in a ways you act in ways that you think like fit with how you are named, right?
Mm.
But also the way that you are, especially for other people, kind of informs what your name represents.
Mm.
So they can make assumptions about other people who have that name, something
Mm.
like that. So, and the reason for this is mostly due to the self-fulfilling prophecy, kind of,
Mm.
where with a name, you kind of want to grow into it because of what it represents. So, for example, um, suppose you have a really complicated name that's
Yeah.
very different from anybody else in your class, right? You know that you're different in some way.
True.
So perhaps you will also continue to try to stand out from your peers and be your own self because already just by this, you know that you are different. Or maybe there was like a famous person with this name and you want to, I don't know, you have a like some kind of feeling that you will be similar to them in some way or things like that. It's hard to wrap it up in a simple, sentence, but that is the premise that your name is a representation of you and vice versa. And as for how I think I grew into my name, I always knew that it was not really like other people's names. Like it wasn't Jessica, it wasn't Nicole, which there were like 7 of those in my grade.
Mm.
Um, so it's like because they had the same name as other people, maybe. So this is where it's actually kind of interesting. Like it can go either way. Like if you have a generic name that is shared by many people, you either also become kind of generic, or because of that, you are forced to become unique to stand out from those people,
Mm.
right? So, and on the other hand, if you have a very unique name, perhaps you will follow that route and be very unique yourself, or perhaps you will feel not included into like the majority and feel like an outcast maybe
Mm.
and end up acting that way, not really doing much with yourself or
Yeah.
so I think that of like what you do with your name is up to what kind of person you are and what experiences you've had and what people you've had to support you. Because for me, I think I took the more like, oh, I'm different from everyone and I want to stay that way. I've had like many experiences where I was kind of annoyed at my name, but not at my name itself, but more at like people who didn't really respect it by pronouncing it correctly or not even like bothering to try to pronounce it correctly when I correct them.
Mm.
Um, or like intentionally mispronouncing it. There have been times when I really just wanted to go through an experience well, and then my name was mispronounced, and then it just like tainted it a bit, like my high school graduation, about to, graduate, and then my name is mispronounced.
There were literally like 6 Emilys in my classroom, and I'd always thought like, oh, like I want to have a less generic name because that would make me more special, you know. I just wanted to be different. And the funny thing is, I had gone abroad for I think half of my college years. That was when I actually changed my name because it was May, and that's what I had gone by for about 2 years. My family doesn't call me that. It's not a family name, which has, a special meaning to it too, even though it is really common. And so it was just like I had never grown into it, and even though I guess I wanted to feel special when I was a sophomore and junior in college, but it didn't jive with me. And then now I'm just like, yeah, Emily's the best thing. This concludes the end of our interview with Valeria. Thank you so much for watching this interview. We hoped you got a lot out of Valeria's points and also how languages have affected her life as well as her identity. We will see each other in another video on Tuesday, so stay tuned.